Welcome to Don't Fear the Weight podcast with your host Vicky Masita, bringing together science and personal experience.
Hi guys, welcome back to the next episode of Don't Fear the Weight with your tiny titan host, Vicky Masita. I am always the same, as you know, but this morning, or this evening, should I say, whichever, it's morning where you are, Natalie, but it's evening where I am. So, the time difference has completely messed me up. I've got a really, really exciting guest by Natalie Graziano, who is an IFBB Pro as well, and I'm going to let her just explain how amazing she is, and I don't want her to hold back. So, morning, Natalie, how are you? How are you feeling?
Good. How are you?
I'm not bad, thank you at all. So let's have a little bit of a background about who you are, Natalie, and where you come from and everything else.
Originally from Iowa. I currently live in Florida. Like you said, I compete as an IFBB Pro. I got my pro card in fitness, but I switched over to physique in 2016. I got my education background. I got my master's in master's in occupational therapy in 2007, and then my doctorate in physical therapy in 2008. And I practice as both, but primarily now I started my own business, which is Dr. Graz Muscle Restoration, which is mostly the physical therapy part. Occasionally the occupational therapy will come in the sense of like ergonomics and assistive technology or something like that, but it's mostly physical therapy now at this point.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and so I just I basically travel around Florida mainly, but I do go out of state and to different like bodybuilding events to treat clients, and it is mostly athletes and competitive athletes, but I do have some, just word of mouth types of clients as well. So just kind of like your day-to-day issues.
Right. Okay. So that's basically what we're doing this podcast about today, isn't it? It's about muscle restoration for the physically active person, especially people like bodybuilders and powerlifters and things. So what does that actually entail not really in its entirety, but what is the whole basis behind muscle restoration? Is this to literally bring somebody back from the brink of injury or to actually help rehabilitate that injury?
It's a little bit of everything, like a little bit of prevention, so like prehab, which I guess is a term somebody did now. So like prehab, a little bit of rehab. And then also there's the aspect of just getting ready for show day. So not even really either of the above. A lot of people will use the techniques for definition and basically getting the muscles better able to show on the stage.
Wow. Okay.
So a little bit of everything. But yeah, there is a lot of injury that I help, or, pain, so to speak, if they're having issues with a certain lift or certain movements. It kind of depends and varies greatly.
Right. Okay. That's ace. So what we're going to be looking at is, obviously you are a female bodybuilder. I am an aspiring female bodybuilder and just been trying to gain as much muscle mass as possible for the last kind of three years. And it hasn't really gone my way, I should say. But because of the simple fact that we have a big following in female muscle building and retention of lean tissue, when it comes to looking at a lot of women who have been complaining about injury, mostly with knee pain and shoulder pain, and have a lot of experience about that. So in your point of view, why is it that women suffer with those particular joints on their own?
Knee pain especially goes back to the hips. The female hips are wider, and we have a different what's called Q angle between the femur and the hip and everything down the chain. With that being the case versus a male pelvis structure being more narrow, it sets our knees up for the likelihood of being more unstable and injury. And it is just more that angle. And don't get me wrong, some females don't have the issue. It really does depend on their pelvic structure. But it is more prone in females. So a lot of times things like jumping, bounding, those kind of like high intensity moves, cutting, things like that set the knee up for issues if that foundation isn't there. It's one of the things, like when I watch some of the videos of, of like box jumping and things like that, I cringe. Because sometimes I'm just like, I can just see the knee caving. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it a lot on leg pressing and on squats as well. Just the women, I don't know what it is. I mean, obviously you're the expert from there, but I don't understand why women just carry on performing that movement, knowing that their knees are caving in and suffering with knee pain. Why do you think that is? You just think they just want to get better at the lift?
I think sometimes it really is a lack of self-awareness too. It's one thing for us to watch a video or watch someone else do it and be able to point something out and say, oh, that's an issue, fix that. But it's completely different when it comes to us. Unless we are videoing everything that we do or doing everything in front of a mirror, we don't always see it from from our perspective. So unless somebody points it out to us, then sometimes we just don't know. Sometimes it is just kind of chasing that extra weight or that extra rep or, pushing yourself. And you kind of get to those last reps where it's just not great form. You're really struggling with it. And there's nothing inherently wrong about pushing yourself. But at the same time, pushing yourself and having that risk is usually where the issue comes in.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So sometimes I think it's just that lack of awareness. And then sometimes I think it is just that, that extra push. I gotta do it. I gotta get that extra. Rep. Yeah. I gotta get that rep. I gotta get that new PR or whatever. And that's usually where it happens.
And I have to say that is me all over. It's just like, I mean, I am very, very in the realms of harm prevention and injury prevention, but sometimes I just think, no, I've got to get that rep. I don't care. So I do completely agree with that one. So when you talked about prehab or preventative or preventing an injury, how would you go about programming somebody to do some prehab exercises to avoid those knee injuries?
A lot of eccentrics are good, actually, versus what most people think is you actually have to load the weight or you have to, do certain things that are kind of standard, I guess you could say, in the thought process. But really that eccentric and that control is where the benefits come in and where you can see a lot more of that. Sometimes it's not even a full contraction or a full range of motion. You can also get really good results from doing isometrics because you have to get that neuromuscular connection.
Sure.
So sometimes it is just kind of feeling that connection, not necessarily moving through the full plane, but just getting that mind muscle connection. Because once you do that, then you're going to be able to recruit more in order to get that, that muscle group or that, stabilizer, whatever you're working for. So a little bit of both. One that I like to do, especially for bounding exercises, so any jumping, things like that, is actually coming down from the platform and just stopping at the bottom. So not even worrying about the explosive portion, because that's not usually where people have the problem. They may have a little bit of it as they're going down to, get into the jump, but it's usually during the landing where the problem happens. So that's why I kind of take it the other way. Doesn't have to be a large step box, whatever it is that, that's in the gym, but just coming down from it, landing in that squatted position and making sure that as that happens, the knees aren't caving in towards each other, that you're staying out, in that squat position. That's a big one.
Yeah, definitely.
And then of course, the good old bikini booty favorite of like banded abduction. As silly as it sounds, it tends to be a very weak muscle, not only in females, but a lot of people. And it causes a lot of that caving because there's not that drive in the abductors to keep the knees and the legs going out or even in a straighter position. So as silly as they seem sometimes, it actually is beneficial.
Absolutely, absolutely. I get a lot of my clients just putting a band around their knees and actually squatting with that just as warm-ups to make sure that they're
Hmm.
seriously pushing the bands out.
Yeah.
And everybody does tend to laugh at me when I bring these bands out. And it's like, actually, you know, just hang on a minute because you're going to hate them. And that's the reason why I call them the bands of doom when we first of all bring them out. Because they're horrible. I mean, you're not going to build muscle by doing them. But, you know, just that, like you said, that ISO hold and really feeling that muscle work. Oh God, it's horrible.
Yeah.
So no, totally agree with that one. Okay, so we've got bands around the knees, and let's talk about warm-ups then, because I really love these. You see everybody going into the gym, getting ready to squat, and they put the bands around the hip circles around their knees, and they start doing these crab walks side to side.
Hmm.
We see lots of people do that. Do you think that that's very, very beneficial to get into your squat position, or what else would you recommend that they do?
What I see with that a lot is actually people not really staying in the position that they started in.
Yeah.
Everything starts to take over for the weaker muscles. And then what ends up happening is instead of staying in an abduction, you're also getting this like external rotation because the foot will start to go more to the outside. The other one comes to the inside to follow it. And then it's just, it's just downhill from there.
Yeah.
Um, So I don't, unless you are very meticulous about the way that you're doing it, keeping the toes and, and the knees in the proper alignment, then go ahead and do it. I also see people not really getting far enough down in it.
Yeah.
So it's really not getting the benefit. I prefer to do more static and, and you can do with or without the bands, but get down low. Even if you don't necessarily squat ass to grass, just get low in the stance and work on just kind of a pulsating push out and abducting. Yeah. It will burn because it's not a comfortable position, and they're, like I said, they're weaker, but it really gets that, that mind muscle connection going and kind of priming them for what you want them to do when you're lifting. Just kind of stay down there. You can even do holds. So pulse it up and hold it for a couple of seconds, come back down. But I guarantee, like, if you're, getting to 10 or 15, you're already going to feel it burning. And like I said, you don't have to be squatting ass to grass for it to still prime what you're going to do. Because I know not everybody can actually do that with the weight on their back. You should be able to do it without any weight.
Yeah.
So just get down there without any weight. Don't worry about that.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I prefer that from the actual walking with it. Yeah. And I'm not a big fan of hip thrusting because, again, like, it's another thing that I see a lot of people doing wrong. Even though they're kind of using it as that primer, especially to be able to, like, follow through at the top of, say, like a deadlift or something. A lot of people do it wrong. They really explode through everything else and let the knees travel in the wrong direction. And I don't like those as primers either, unless you really know where you should be traveling in the kinesthetic space. Yeah. I end up getting a lot of bikini girls that, they think they need to be doing a bar with 2 plates on the side. God, and I give them a 20-pound weight and, put them in the right position and they're dying. And I'm like, like, so you really don't need to do bars and bars of weight.
But this is it, and again, this is where people come through. I think it is that mentality of, I've got to put more weight on the bar. I've got to hit that PR and things like that. Again, I had a client and she was like, 130 kilo hip thrust. And I'm looking at her going, oh my God, I've got a strong ass, and yet I do it maybe with, like you said, a 20 kilo bar. And I make sure that those squeezes are absolutely bob on. One of my strongest lifters, he's 110 kilos and he just does hip thrusts with a band around his knees and he's crying. But that is all you need. As long as you get that contraction correct, that is all you need, definitely. What about your viewpoint then on things like glute bridges? So those hip thrusts from the floor and the frog pumps, that's quite a big one these days as quote unquote booty builders.
Kind of the same. I mean, they kind of all fall in the same thing where a lot of people, they're really not using the glutes to isolate the contraction. They're using a lot of other things. And I commonly see them wrong. I don't think they're bad, inherently if you're doing them properly. But, there's tons of girls that come to me, they're like, I just don't understand. Like, how am I supposed to build my ass? I've been doing all of this stuff and I can't get anything. And I'm like, well, probably it's just not being done right.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong. Like, not every genetic profile is built to have a huge butt.
Damn it.
I hate to break it to females, but not everybody is genetically programmed to have a huge ass. So sometimes it is a little harder to do. The other problem I usually see is that, and I know we'll kind of get into the problems that I run into, but hip position and structure is kind of what dictates function. It's as far as therapy and things like that go, and lifting, structure dictates function. I can never say that. It's like a tongue twister. But what you see a lot of times with females is that forward anterior pelvic tilt.
Sure.
Which leads to a lot of other things, but it also puts the glutes on a stretch. And internal rotation will do the same thing, which is kind of the position that you find a lot of people in these days because of sitting a lot, things like that, and just not really having a strong posterior chain. So, I get these girls coming in and they're like, I can't build it. I can't do this. I don't understand why. And it really comes down to more their structure, not an unchangeable structure. So it's more of a functional structure.
Okay.
But, it also, it goes back to why these are bad, or not bad, but just not ideal to do, because a lot of times they can't recruit what they want to recruit because of that functional structure.
Okay.
They, that with that stretch, it puts the muscles on, oh gosh, I'm forgetting it puts them on a mechanical disadvantage.
Right.
So they aren't going to be able to contract the way that we want them to. It's not that they're not going to contract at all, but it's definitely not optimal. Every muscle has, kind of a bell curve of, that sweet spot where they're going to contract really great. And then everything to the side of that is kind of suboptimal. And when you get that forward pelvic tilt, the internal rotation at the hip joint, everything is on a stretch. So it's on, that skewed end of not going to do very much. So that's kind of what it comes down to with all of these primers, is that sometimes structurally, they're not going to be able to recruit what they want to recruit until that part is, brought back into alignment, so to speak, to where they can optimally get that muscle contraction.
Okay.
So sometimes it's really not just, the exercise itself, it's, what they're actually able to do with it.
Right. And do you find then, if you're talking about a structure of the pelvis itself, do you find that women who have had children suffer more with knee pain and hip problems than people who haven't had children? Because obviously the hips move, don't they? And they change position after you've given birth. Natural, obviously.
Yeah. It'll still they'll still spread and everything, even if you have a C-section or things like that. Like during the process. But yeah, it kind of varies. Definitely it makes you more prone as a female to having hip and sacroiliac joint issues because of that relaxin that's gone through the body. And, and then usually positioning during pregnancy, like people will typically stand, and even after, like if you're carrying a baby, you're typically shifting your weight to one side.
Yeah.
And that one-sided stance tends to make the hip joint even more vulnerable for issues, especially at the SI joint. And that part can be with or without a baby. I see a lot of females who just tend to do that, and they have issues on one side because that's just the way that they stand a lot. So it can be with or without, but definitely the hormonal changes that go on through pregnancy, and the spreading and coming back of the hips definitely set up for more issues.
Definitely. Okay. Yeah. So moving away from the hips and the knees just a little bit more then, we understand that as female lifters, we are stronger on our lower half than we are on our top half. And a lot of the time, I've seen a lot of women who have tried to hit those PRs either on overhead presses or on bench and that kind of thing, suffer with a lot of shoulder problems. Do you see a lot of that yourself as well? And is that because of, simply speaking, is it because we're heavier up top with our breast tissues, which is obviously what's causing us to get a little bit of kyphosis going on?
It can be a couple of different things. And yes, that definitely plays a part. Larger chested women are going to have that, that normal pull of the tissue. Although it does sit on top of the muscular tissue. So sometimes it's really not what's pulling the muscle in. The kyphosis can be from a lot of different things, especially nowadays with texting, computers, iPads, whatever. Sure. It's like this whole multitude of things that just cause us to constantly be, forward posture, rounded back, forward head and neck, internal rotation, the whole 9 yards. And they all kind of lead into that. But the other part that plays into it is also the clavicular structure.
Okay.
It's going to limit the range that you're going to have for being able to do certain things, because you may or may not run into your own AC joint or something like that when your clavicle is a certain position, as well as the rounded shoulders. So there are a couple different things, and that's something that we really can't do as much about as far as the clavicular positioning or the angle. And that goes for males too, because I see it just as much sometimes with males.
Oh,
but
right,
definitely, yeah. It kind of goes to to why some people have wider lats and different structuring and able to get different physique properties because of this clavicular angle. The flatter clavicular angle is considered what we call a Dutch clavicle, because apparently, in Dutch, you will see a lot of that.
Right.
And then other genetic backgrounds will have more of a higher angle clavicle, which, usually will be a little bit more of a higher shoulder posturing. And then, of course, the issues that will go along with that, versus the wider clavicles, you're going to have that very V shape. You're going to be able to get more of a wider lat, wider shoulder base, and than those narrow structures. But yeah, all of them can lead to that forwarding. And then what happens with the forward posture is it basically brings the AC joint closer to the glenohumeral joint. So as you're starting to move the arm, whether it's usually shoulder pressing and overhead movements are going to be the worst part. But it can happen too with chest. So you do run into that a lot. I'll get like the clicking and popping or grinding. That's usually what people are telling me about. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say what would be the most common reason. In this day and age, I think it would definitely be posture.
Sure.
Most people don't really get that upright posture in a normal day for more than a couple seconds.
And it's weird, isn't it? Because if you have a look at a baby when they first have they first start sitting up, when a baby sits up, they are straight as a die and their shoulders are back and their chest is up and they just sit there and they play like that. And then all of a sudden, when they get given their first game console or something like that, they turn into these like little fetal position things again and really kind of concave over. And it's quite sad, really, how we can do that. I'm saying that, and at the moment, I've got the most terrible posture in the world at the moment, because we're sat down and having a chat. So maybe I should be stood up with a good posture and things like that. But this is why we're having an audio only one today, I'm afraid. So, all right. So go on. Sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say, it's the same thing for squatting. If you watch a child up to about probably age 3 or 4, when they start kind of getting, different environmental cues and things like that, it's perfect squat position.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, and then once they kind of, like I said, get into different environmental things, just whatever feels comfortable, or if they're on a certain couch or a certain type of chair, it starts building these habits that you just kind of keep on doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
interesting to watch.
annoying. It is. It's very interesting, but it's also annoying at the same time, And it's just like, oh, for God's sake, would you just? I remember my mum always saying to me, "For God's sake, Victoria, would you just sit up straight?" And I thought to myself that I was. And actually you're not. You're slumped over at the dinner table. It's like, oh God, now I've got to remember my manners as well as my posture. There's so much that needs to go on in these kids' heads. In a way, I feel sorry for them. I'm glad I'm not a kid anymore, I tell you. Not physically anyway. Right, okay. So in terms of kind of keeping your shoulder joints safe then, just like we said with the hips, are there any kind of stabilization warm-ups that we could probably do, male or female, to ensure that our scapula is kind of safe doing these heavy lifts, especially overheads?
Yeah, it really needs the scapular stability. And there's a couple primers that I like to do, which I don't know if it would be better to, maybe try to film something so that you can attach it, or how you'd like to do that.
Sure.
Because obviously talking through them isn't going to be great, but so some of them you can do like without weight, or with a light band once you kind of get the feel for them. But most people think pure shoulder retraction is what's going to be, beneficial. And it's really not pure retraction, because pure retraction, if you think about it, is more like pinching the shoulder blades together as if there's like a tennis ball back there.
Yeah.
And it's not wrong, but it's also not going to what we call seat the scapula down, because it doesn't have that down portion. So getting it back is good, but you really need to get that down too. Especially to keep like the upper traps out of doing a lot of exercises. So I usually say do these on arm day, back day, chest day, and shoulder day. So basically, like if you're not doing legs.
Yeah.
Should probably, like it usually kind of comes in when you're doing legs, because as you like say you were deadlifting, you just automatically kind of pull them down and back as you finish. So you don't really have to think about it as much. But everything else, it needs it to just keep everything moving in the proper plane of motion. So you can start overhead in a V with the hands up and the thumbs up and kind of turned in just a little bit. And what you want to work on is being able to pull the shoulders down and back in that position without the elbows bending. When the elbows bend, you're automatically trying to engage other things to bring the shoulder back. So that's kind of your cue. If you see your elbows bending, you're not really using your stabilizers. You're starting to compensate somewhere else.
Right.
And I do recommend doing them in front of a mirror so that you can watch, are your upper traps coming in? Because typically people with weak scapular stabilizers are going to kick in with their upper traps, which is why there's a lot of, upper trap pain, neck pain, things like that when there are shoulder issues, because they're kicking in with the wrong muscles first. That's what ends up being the primary mover. Right. So starting in that position up and bringing them down, just kind of what I tell people is start to get the hang of it. Just feel it first. When you feel like you've got it and you notice that your traps aren't engaging, you're not bending your elbows, then go for duration. Because in your day-to-day life, this isn't something that you should do just when you're lifting. It's part of posture.
Sure.
So it ends up being an endurance of those muscles to be able to hold it there during the day. So then just start working on, hitting that position and holding for maybe 5 seconds, and then go to 10, and, just kind of keep working on it. But it's not all about the actual strength of the muscles and what they can do. It is really about the endurance and them being able to do it for a longer period of time for you.
Right.
Then once you've got it in the V position, kind of come down to a 90-degree angle and closer in, and do the same thing. Try to bring them down and back, and what we call seat them, which is kind of like putting them in your back pocket versus that into the middle. So kind of bringing them down and back. It's a lot harder in the middle position. And same thing, like once you feel like you have that middle position, you can lower the arms, and it's even harder there because you really have to have that, kind of that external rotation down and back. So you have like your starting point, your middle point, and then like your more advanced. Once you get the feel of it, you've got a little bit of endurance. If you want to add a light band to it, like a yellow or red, if you're going in like the typical color scheme. I mean, so many of these companies now have different colors, so you're like, I don't know which one is the light one.
Yeah. But I like
but your typical therapy progression is, like your yellow, your red, your green, blue, and on up.
Yeah.
So start with your lighter ones. You can put that in there. Once you've got it to where you feel like you can do it with a light weight, you can also go to do what we call prone YTIs.
Yeah.
A lot of people have problem with these because they end up lifting, like I said, with the traps first. So with these, a lot of people overestimate how much weight they can do with them properly. When hypertrophy coach jokes about these, anabolic pink dumbbells and stuff, some people may have to start there with YTIs because they're very difficult to keep the scapula seated.
Sure.
And properly do them. But you're prone on the bench. For men or taller people who have longer arms, you may have to angle the bench, which is fine. Or if you have like an actual, like a table or like one of the taller benches that people will use for like prone rows, seal rows, anything like that. Just something where you can be flat on your stomach. But what you want to focus on is getting the scapula seated and then lifting first into a Y position with the thumbs up. Do some reps with those. Go out to the side, so more of a T motion first with the thumbs up, and then you can switch and do pinkies up. And then to the back is more your just normal extension, so your eye of the positioning. But same thing, keeping the scapula seated. What ends up happening is people overdo that last motion in the eye and let the shoulder roll forward.
Yeah.
So it's really not a large range of motion for pure extension in the shoulder. So if your shoulder starts to roll forward, you're already, at the top of that motion arc. So those are usually your two core stabilizers for your shoulder. You have your normal like external rotation for shoulder stuff, but I see that wrong so many times.
That's your bugbear, isn't it? I've just seen your face with that. It's like, oh good God, yes, please don't do that. But yeah, it is them, isn't it? So why do you see people doing that wrong? Because obviously this is supposed to be, external rotation movement is supposed to be one for your rotator cuff, right?
Yeah.
And what do you see them doing it wrong? Are they just kind of flaring things out and their elbows aren't tucked in? And is that kind of thing that you see?
It's a little bit of everything. Some of it is just like poor stabilization of it while it's happening. So some of it's actually in the wrong range of motion. If you're going to do it closer to your body, there needs to be a towel or a ball or something in between your body and your elbow.
Yeah.
And that's to prevent, any what we call ringing of the muscles. So it ends up causing like a small lack of blood supply, and it also is not as good for the rest of the, the structures going in, all the tendons and everything. So to put it in more of a proper position, either place it on a bench so you're at 90 degrees and supported, and and then you can do back and forth, but otherwise put something in between the shoulder and the elbow, and you can still do it from there. Right. But it's just better for shoulder joint health as you're doing it. But yeah, I see people, just kind of flailing it. I see them like stuck into their sides or like, kind of in that crevice by the hip. I mean, yeah, I see all kinds of different crazy stuff. But, as a therapist, I'm like, oh God.
It is funny. I mean, there's this one guy in my gym, and he does exactly that. I mean, his warm up routine is literally just kind of like airboxing, and then he'll pick up the twos, and he'll do this funky little thing like this, and then sorry guys, this is an audio only one, so you can't actually see what I'm doing, but I'm flapping around like a headless chicken basically. And then he'll pick up some little plates, and then he'll go up and down with the plates like this, and doing that kind of motion. And I just keep on thinking to myself, what are you doing? But then he'll go and squat really badly. So it's like, okay, so you warmed up your shoulders to squat, and you haven't actually done anything with your hips there. But okay, each to your own, it's fine. So, all right, cool. What I like to do as well on that external rotation thing is I like lying on my side and putting a foam roller in between the elbow and the joint, and just moving it up very slowly that way with the pink dumbbells. And people always laugh at me because I'm there on my last rep going, ah, with a pink dumbbell, you know. But, you know, it's the same thing. Those are crafty little buggers, those pink dumbbells, you know, never underestimate them. They're hardcore. All right. So we've talked about the safety net, the safety net aspect of things then, and kind of doing your prehab. What about post-injury? What if somebody comes to you and they've had, let's stick on the shoulder joint. What if they've had a torn rotator cuff? How would you then try and restore that muscle so they can start lifting again properly?
Definitely, like the first part of it is, you know, doing more of your isometrics and just kind of gentle range of motion to get that back, depending on what they've had done. Like if there is a surgery, if there's not, we may have protocols that we have to follow, we may not. If we'll just pretend that it's no protocol for for ease of explanation. But you definitely don't want to jump back into anything. You know, typically what we have to do is look at maybe why it happened in the first place. And this is where I do this even with my clients that don't have anything wrong, but I always look for the why, because if we don't break that cycle of whatever it was that caused it, it's just going to happen again.
Yeah.
So whether it's posture, whether it's, you know, a weakness in, you know, whatever, either your agonist or your antagonist of whatever that muscle is, your agonist is going to be that one, but anyway,
it's okay. So, we'll keep that in. It's fine. Yeah. It's a blooper.
You know, so you have to look for why it would have happened in the first place, and then kind of, you know, not only address the problem in the healing process, but address, you know, that basis to break the cycle. So it is a little bit of both. You know, we may start with those isometrics and just general range of motion to kind of let it heal, but still give it, you know, that contraction, that pump to get some of the swelling out too. Isometrics are really great for trying to get, you know, water out of, or fluid, whatever is in there, out of the muscle. You know, so we kind of start with that. Then we go to, you know, to lighter, usually band or just even air range of motion. Because sometimes, you know, in getting that proper technique, it really does have to be with no weight and just going through the range of motion so that they can feel what it should feel like. Sure. You know, if we are addressing any postural issues, we may be doing joint mobilization and manipulation to have that happen, which may end up being like thoracic, not just the shoulder. Yeah. You know, as we were talking before about the fact that kyphotic posturing can lead to the shoulder issue, sometimes we end up having to address that thoracic rib area and the thoracic spine area in order to, you know, give a better ability for that person to posture that shoulder. You know, so it's kind of all encompassing in that. And then obviously moving into more what they're wanting to get back to. Yeah. If we're talking about, you know, 80-year-old Susan over here who wants to just get back to playing with her grandkids or washing her hair again, we're talking completely different things than a lifter. So a lot of times, you know, you have to figure out what it is that they want to get back to, and then use that as part of your process, making sure that they're strong in that position, that they're stable in that position, and that, you know, they can do it safely so that it doesn't happen again. Sure. So then, you know, it may be baby steps in that, of working partial ranges. You kind of have to muscle test and figure out, is there a part of the range that's weaker than the other? And just kind of train within that. There is nothing inherently wrong about partials as long as you're using them to an advantage. I mean, if you just don't realize that when you're doing bicep curls, that your elbow actually does extend all the way out and all the way up, then we've got a different issue. But like, if every rep is like that, but yeah, so sometimes you work in the partials to strengthen at the ends of the range, because that is usually where people are weaker, and where the issues happen, especially say chest pressing, bench pressing. You're going to have that weakness in those
ranges of motion.
Yeah, but there's a word. Yeah. But yeah, you're going to have that lack of strength there, because most people don't train there.
Yeah.
So that's where your lack of strength and stability tends to come from, and where the injuries tend to happen.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of that, and then obviously, going back into the full motion, just baby steps as far as the weight, and kind of progressing to where it needs to be.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to get in there with, with manual therapy techniques to loosen any issues that happen. Fibrotic tissue is different than scar tissue. So when I talk about like fibrous tissue, and releasing any tissue, it's not in relation to scar tissue, because scar tissue has a very high tensile property. So, like, we're not going to break scar tissue unless we cut it. Right. And clearly we're not doing that with our patients.
No, I'd hope not.
There are definitely ways to manipulate that tissue so that it may be softer. But scar tissue is scar tissue. Fibrous tissue can come from, if you have an injury and there's swelling in there, anything that stays behind is what you could consider like a waste product that just doesn't necessarily flush all the way out, can turn into a hardened tissue that is not the same as a scar tissue as far as like what we can do to help break that up. Right. So we can get in there with different methods, whether it's, through active cupping, not static. We're active on this one, which is a whole different spiel. But like active cupping to distract the tissue, you can get in there with different manual therapy techniques, whether it be actual hands-on manual therapy manipulation, or with the IASTM tools, which are the stainless steel. A lot of people know it as Graston, but Graston is actually just a company that produces the tools and gives a class. They're Graston and IASTM are basically like saying Kleenex and tissue. They are the same thing. Right. So you can get in doing that. And then there's also a couple different other techniques, like a machine called A-stim, which you don't see very often, that can get in there. But those are also ways that we can get in and address any fibrous tissue that was laid down in the healing process.
Right. What about your thoughts on acupuncture? Talking about different methods, have you got your own thoughts on acupuncture and needling?
Yeah, I've actually, dry needling I feel is a little different, and I actually don't really get into too much dry needling because there are parts of the U.S. that we're not allowed to do it. So it's not a treatment that is universally available for everyone. So I tend to stay away from it. I have more of an electrical acupuncture unit that I can use, which also has a feature to going through scar tissue as well to soften, by using the dual polarity. And it basically puts that polarity through the tissue and will kind of work on helping to break it up. But regular acupuncture, I think, is very beneficial for many reasons. I've had it done personally on me both ways, the electrical units and traditional acupuncture, with great results. I know a lot of people are very skeptical, like, it's like foo-foo, pseudoscience, whatever. But honestly, like, if you've never tried it, at least try the traditional acupuncture once in your life. Yeah. There are so many things that not just pain related, but overall health and well-being that acupuncture really does help with. And if you look deeper into like acupuncture and some of the old, ancient Eastern thought and different techniques that they have over there, acupuncture and yoga are actually very interrelated. And it was something that I'd never thought of. It wasn't really anything anybody said, but there are certain yoga poses that actually stimulate acupuncture points.
Okay.
And it's kind of interesting. So I see more of these correlations and stuff now, but I think it's very beneficial. I think it's a little bit different than just a true rehab, but I think it can do a lot of things for pain. And some of the reason that people are postured that way, sometimes it's really just like an emotional thing. It just kind of manifests from something that may have happened. So maybe they're depressed.
Yeah.
And they kind of get that closed down look and appearance, that very unconfident look. And actually going in and like targeting, I guess with acupuncture, it's a different thing, but like along the heart meridian.
Yeah.
And Scott can probably like butcher me for this if I go the wrong direction. But so along the heart meridian and opening up the heart channel will sometimes actually bring that person just out of that shell, that posturing, which of course like fixes all kinds of other things, lungs, ribs, stomach, digestion, because that forward posturing gets all of that. You're going to have a harder time opening your rib cage to breathe. You're going to have digestive issues because you're collapsed onto all of your intestines and things like that. Your hip flexors are tight. It's a whole myriad of issues. But just going in and doing something as simple as addressing the heart meridian and opening that up. Same thing with yoga and doing heart openers, which are basically chest and thoracic opening. Major changes.
Yeah, massive. I completely agree with that. I'm a big believer of psychology, and your thought process actually affecting a lot to do with your physical appearance and your physical strength, and everything has to be taken into account, definitely. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Actually, it's not a lot of people when I talk about it, they always think that I'm talking some hippie woo-woo kind of shit, and it's not. It is all interrelated, and I completely agree with that. All right, my lovely. Well, I know that we are coming up on time here, and I've taken up a lot of your time, but obviously, for our last note, what would you give as an ending bit of advice for any kind of aspiring bodybuilder or powerlifter or even CrossFitter out there who is in their prime off season, and how they can help prevent some injuries going into some heavy lifting?
I know, as much as everybody hates me saying it, stretching and mobility is huge.
Yeah.
If you're trying to build muscle, it's like this fine line between the size and the mobility.
Yeah.
A lot of times you sacrifice mobility for size. And then you kind of end up with the issues following that. So it's kind of keeping this balance between the two, stretching and mobility, and then obviously stabilization. If you don't have that basic foundation and stabilization for any kind of lifting, you're going to have the issues coming along with it. And those are the big things that I see. If I see someone who has, very tight chest or shoulder girdle, if I ask them, well, how often do you stretch? I'm 9 to 10 times out of 10 going to get, I don't.
All the time. Yeah.
Or I get, well, I foam roll.
Yeah.
Which is kind of another thorn in my side. It can help with mobility. However, to really release muscles and things like that, foam rolling is great for like your being able to kind of inhibit certain areas and then get like a blood flow back through. But most of foam rolling is going with the tissue itself, like the direction of the tissue, which is what you don't want to do if you're trying to release a tissue. So that's kind of why I don't really like foam rolling. But so I'll get people saying like, well, I foam roll. And that's why I kind of look at them like, so, you know, stretching and mobility are are huge in keeping your ability to grow.
Yeah.
Also, if you can't get to a certain range of motion to facilitate new growth, you're not going to grow.
Yeah.
You have to be able to get that, you know, that stretch at the end of the muscle to fire more muscle tissue, get more neuromuscular recruitment in order to grow. You know, and of course we're talking like just basic, not to do with somebody who's supplementing, anything like that. It's still somewhat the same for them, but obviously they're going to get tissue growth, you know, by doing it.
Sure.
You know, so it is a little bit different. So don't mix the two.
I think though, even if they are going to do that, and we talk just like a little bit of supplementation there, even if people are going to do that, they're going to grow a lot quicker than natural athletes. So realistically, they should be taking care of their flexibility and mobility a lot more, because they'll be carrying around a lot more mass before their body has had time to kind of catch up with it. If that makes sense. It does in my head.
There's usually like a large growth spurt, but not, you know, not a mobility within that growth. Yeah. You know, plus some of the things can actually be detrimental to the tissues themselves.
Right.
You know, like just kind of touching on that whole aspect, like, you know, you're doing muscle damage anytime you're injecting. Yeah. That's, I mean, unless you're doing sub-Q, and then we're not touching muscle, but you are still doing tissue damage, to where you can have, you know, fibrous areas from constant injections or things like that. So there's a whole different level of need to take care of your tissues. Plus, some of them actually can affect tendon and joint tissues just by their actual properties. So it's something to, you know, to keep in mind if supplementation route is the way that the person chooses to go. You know, it's not just about the growth and needing the mobility, it's actual like integrity of the tissue. So it is a little bit of both. But yeah, usually, you know, anytime I do a release with someone, I also tell them to be careful when they go to lift again, because they have a new range of motion and they're going to be weaker in that new range of motion. Typically the, you know, the further out part of that range of motion, not the closer in, but still to go a little bit lighter, to, you know, to get used to that extra range of motion, have the stability before they go and push it. Because if you have that extra mobility without stability, that's when you're asking for a lot of questions, a lot of problems too.
Yeah, definitely.
And I see that a lot with females in the sense that they have a lot of mobility, but they don't have the stability.
Yeah.
You know, kind of going back to that original question. So, you know, as far as muscle growth and, you know, what to do to kind of prevent stuff, it really is about both mobility and stability. You need to make sure you're safe on both sides of it before you start to really push something.
Yeah, definitely. Great tips to kind of take home there, guys, as well. So, Natalie, just before you go, will you let everybody know where they can follow you and get in touch with you if they have any kind of questions at all?
Yeah, on Instagram, it's at Dr. Graz Muscle Restoration, and just the DR, not the whole doctor. YouTube, I'm still kind of working on setting that up, but it's the same thing, Dr. Graz Muscle Restoration. And then everything else I kind of lead on my personal accounts. So like Snapchat, all that stuff is all is all more under my name. Yeah. I don't really put a whole lot of the physical therapy stuff on there. I try to keep them separate. So you can follow them, but you're not going to see anything like, you know, outstandingly educational or mobility wise on there.
That's it. You know, why not? Well, you're still a human being at the end of the day, aren't you? So that's awesome. So what I will do is I will put those links underneath the YouTube channel here, guys. So if you do have any questions for Natalie at all, or for myself, as always, your Tiny Titan host, whatever I'm doing, I don't let me know. But yeah, if you've got any questions at all, guys, or any comments, then please put them in the comment section below. And that is it from Don't Fear the Weight this week. And I shall look forward to catching up with you next week when I have another special guest on. All right. Thank you ever so much, Natalie, for your time. And I will see you all soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.